Alright. Hello, my name is Tolg and I exist, therefore I think too much. I'm reading from Friedrich Nietzsche's Fred's Beyond Good and Evil. I left off at 115, so I'm on point 116. I'm on chapter 4, I think. I rant when I read, so I don't get through a whole lot before it reaches 30 minutes, and I figure 30 minutes is a good cutoff. And I cuss when I talk, and if that's not what you like, then you can find someone who doesn't do that. Because world's filled with 8 billion people. It's weird to think you're the only one doing something. I'm in my backyard with the overgrowth because my significant other is sick inside and found... Do I say that? I don't know. Probably not. I'm TMI anyways. This house is filled with mold, so I figured after cleaning it, it'd be better to just be outside rather than buy the spores I just cleaned. However, this overgrowth is because we're normally sick due to this house. C'est la vie, c'est la guerre. So, Jesus, the sun is bright. Alright, 116 says, the great epochs of our life are at the points when we gain courage to rebaptize our badness as the best in us. The great epochs of our life are at the points when we gain courage to rebaptize our badness as the best in us. Does that mean that we grow up, or that we own what is bad in us and utilize it as the best features of our persons? Because if it is the latter, that makes sense for why one would have to be courageous in order to utilize what is necessarily considered as bad of them as a tool to gain what is better for them. And if one were to understand that what is bad or what is good and what is evil is what is necessary and what is unnecessary, and likewise there are shades in between what is most and what is least in both, then what is unnecessary in us to rebaptize what is unnecessary in us to be utilized for the best possible outcome for us. That'd be a fucking powerful move. Point 117, the will to overcome an emotion is ultimately only the will of another, or of several other emotions. That sounds like addiction. You replace an addiction with a different addiction in order to get over the original addiction. Like quitting alcohol, you change to coffee, a lot of people do. Or cocaine. But otherwise, the will to no one should have to overcome an emotion. Emotions are there for an individual to understand, not act on. If one understands that they need to overcome an emotion, then you've only been utilizing an emotion to be able to act on it. You've been mistaking emotions as actions in and of themselves, which means that you've been acting wildly inappropriate, probably towards yourself and others. And in this vein, if one were to overcome an emotion, not only is it inappropriate, but it is negating aspects of life that you could further understand. It's pointed stupefaction. Point 118, there is an innocence of admiration. It is possessed by him to whom it has not yet occurred, that he himself may be admired someday. Well, shit. That's not innocence, that's ignorance, and that's often confused. Too many times people say that children are innocent, and as someone who is severely fucking bullied viciously by children, there is not innocence in children, there is ignorance to know how to better do evil. And it is not innocence of admiration, it is ignorance of admiration. that would lead someone to believe that in admiring someone else, they could one day possess that admiration from someone else. That is narcissism. That is essentially the model of narcissism. You have a group of people that pay into your ego, you have a group of people that you abuse with your ego, and then you have a group of people that you aim to be like and you admire in hopes that one day someone will admire you in the same vein. It's subjecting others to the abuse of not understanding your emotional disposition. And a gift is something you freely give because you can afford to give it. Likewise, admiration is something that you can freely give because you can afford to give it. If you are giving admiration because you aim to gain something from it, then that is not true admiration. That is a transaction, and at that point is every single emotion you have a transaction. Are you a business or are you a fucking human? Point 119, our loathing of dirt may be so great as to prevent our cleaning ourselves or justifying ourselves. I do not understand. Our loathing, our hating of what is dirty may be so incredible as to prevent us justifying ourselves. To justify is to want to ascertain justice in understanding, to make sure that something is substantiated in its existence. And in us hating what is essentially conceived of as dirty or less than, we then put ourselves into a position where we don't have the ability to substantiate what we dislike in ourselves. And I guess if we put ourselves into the position of not being able to substantiate what we dislike in ourselves, we don't necessarily fix it, we don't grow, we just let it fester and get worse. So what we hate, we become. Point 120, sensuality often forces the growth of love too much. Bullshit, that's not fucking love. So that its root remains weak and is easily torn up. That's because it wasn't fucking love to begin with. In an act of love, sure, there is an act of enjoying your senses, but that does not denote the entirety of what is love. And there are stages to love as well as an understanding of different chemical complexes denoting different types of love. For instance, puppy love is the same chemical complex as a hit of cocaine. You're still suffering the dopamine, the serotonin, and the oxytocin, which means you're fucking high and apt to make really shit decisions. If you're taking love and misinterpreting it as the high that you get from the senses that you are experiencing, rather than the understanding of an individual and what you appreciate in that individual or that thing or the object, what the value is subjectively per the situation and your life, then of course it would run its course. Because if you are, what you perceive through your senses is a chemical reaction from your nervous system into your brain and your neurons firing. And it tells your system how to interpret the world and how to interact with it. And if that's the basis of your understanding of love, then you need to continue to get high. And in order to continue to get high, you would have to increase the dose of what you are feeling, which leads into this perverse notion of constantly doing more and more where the senses are concerned until you've become so over inundated with what you are feeling that you almost become numb. That's not love. That's chasing a fucking drug. Point 121, it is a curious thing that God learned Greek. Bullshit. If God is everything, if God is omnipotent, omniscient, and omnipresent, then God is everything. Then God would not have learned Greek. God made Greek. As you are a part of God, as anything is a part of God, then anything that has ever been done is something that God has done. God would not need to learn shit. This is egotistical as fuck. It is a curious thing that God learned Greek when he wished to turn author, and that he did not learn it better. I think that Fred understands his ego to be a premise of what God is, that is the height of what one can ascertain as a human, and in that is the closest one could get from God to God. In this respect, he has only the ability to understand God through the greatness that he can acquire, which is the masculinity he suffers onto himself of needing to conquer everything within his grasp, even outside of his grasp. It's fucking lonely and sad, and it kind of makes sense that he would end his life the way that he did if that's how he perceives everything. That the entirety of everything that one can ascertain is the height of their egotistical endeavors. Why they exist simply as a part of God, rather than why God exists as everything, incorporating every single part. Of course, you would learn to hate yourself, because you can never become everything. Point 122, to rejoice on account of praise is in many cases merely politeness of heart and the very opposite of vanity of spirit. To rejoice on account of praise is in many cases merely politeness of heart and the very opposite of vanity of spirit. I don't know how it is for other people because I'm wildly abnormal, so I've understood. But when I receive praise, I understand it as coming from the individual, and so therein the praise has to be understood as to why the tool is used, what value the individual holds. If the person is close to me, what I normally ask for is a critique of my person, whether that be a positive or a negative. I want to understand me better. And if that comes in the form of praise, so be it. But praise in and of itself is subjective per the individual giving it, much like the individual is living a subjective life, so everything that goes through them is filtered through that life that they have lived. So one would have to understand for the health of their ego why they are being complimented or praised at all, if they want to grow from that praise. Because if one understands that they can use someone by giving them something positive, then if you aim to grow off of that, you aim to grow by which other people can use you. And are you growing in a healthy direction, or will you only forever be used thereafter? Are you useful, or are you used? Point 123, even concubinage has been corrupted. And then it says by marriage. So Nietzsche was primarily German and traveled through Europe and spent a lot of his time in Victorian England. Concubines in France were different from concubines in England, were different from concubines in Germany, were different from concubines in Korea, were different from concubines in Japan. It had a hell of a lot to do with government and the reason by which someone would want to utilize sex. And if you see guerrilla warfare, sex has always been a weaponized tool, especially by individuals that were kept from possessing power in any other regard, i.e., wealth of information or like knowledge or wealth in general. Like in the US, a woman couldn't have a fucking credit card until the 1980s. Concubines are different per the culture. And I think this is too general a statement to be understood in modern times. In England, the royal court could be seen as concubines. The ladies in waiting. However, there were specific people that were sex workers. And these sex workers existed in a hierarchical status based on the money and the connections you made. So you could ascertain a high status without owning a title, where the ladies in waiting we're perceived as needing to own information in order to guide society and better influence the queen or the princess, so that the title owned by the wealthy would be utilized to its best extent. And those who were wealthy did, yes, get education. So maybe considering them as concubines wasn't the right take. However, that does not mean that they would not utilize sex in order to engender themselves into other people's lives so as to get information. At which point, how do you define a concubine? Is it a sex worker? And how do you define a sex worker? Is it someone who is paid for the sex that they have? And how do you define that payment? Is it payment by monetary means, or is it payment by information? What truly is prostitution? And in that respect, how many people are married and yet still enact prostitution in their own marriage? I will give you if you give me. Point 124, he who exults at the stake does not triumph over pain, but because of the fact that he does not feel pain where he expected it. A parable. So, exultation. I thought that was exalt, not exult. At which point I'll have to define this later. And at the stake, I'm not entirely sure what that would imply other than, a medieval death trap. And the same neural receptor that interprets pleasure is the same neural receptor that interprets pain, which is why a lot of people get confused between the two. And in a moment where you are suffering incredible damage to your person, you are getting extreme hits of adrenaline, which is also a part of being a masochist, is this addiction to adrenaline. So if you are facing a medieval death fuckery, it isn't that you have overcome pain, you've not done fucking shit, but your body has injected a hell of a lot of adrenaline in order to push your brain into a point in which it has the capacity to survive, which is why a natural mechanism in the body is to release DMT, because the point of this chemical is to make your brain run through every single memory that your nervous system understands to try to find a solution for what you are going through. It is a chemical to promote you into pattern recognition, to ascertain survival. The adrenaline is to help you ride through the pain that you are feeling so you don't go into shock, immediately stopping your heart. Overcoming pain is merely an aspect of death before you completely are sold onto it. But it is not something you have done of your own accord. It is not something earned or gained. It is a natural mechanism of the human existence. Point 125, when we have to change an opinion about anyone, we charge heavily to his account the inconvenience he thereby causes us. So, yeah. I receive general hatred normally. And what I told someone recently, in trying to understand what others could be going through, in that I am white and only have ever been white and could never be perceived as another race other than Asian, because people get really confused based on my round face for some reason. Or rather that I do not conduct myself with incredible hatred, and white people have been denoted as hateful individuals historically. But in this, I have attempted my best to understand other people when they try to meet me with a middle ground, and they find me very accessible to talk to about things, and yet still I am white without experience on my end. So all that I can do is understand them through my own experience, which is all anyone could ever do. My experience is overladen with abuse. And what I have understood of anybody that is colored in the US is that they have existed in an abusive relationship with anybody who is perceived as white or just generally white culture. It is indicative of being in a relationship with a narcissist or a psychopath, as the training of our society is antisocial personality disorder, and the chemicals pumped into the pollution of the air supply, of the water supply, results in antisocial personality disorder in a large amount of cases. With this being said, I think it is very indicative that society at large in the US promotes this, even without understanding it. And with it being paired with historically wanting white supremacy, as division is the only way to conquer the majority. And if you were to read the Constitution, or I just read Abraham's speech on freeing slaves, in just the first few fucking paragraphs, Abraham says, hey, even if you're not okay with freeing the slaves, maybe we could put the slaves in a position where people think they're freed, but they're just out of the way in a different existence, but they're still slaves. The whole premise behind the United States was to promote business and corporation. And the change between slave and factory wasn't to free humans. It wasn't for human rights. It was because there was an economic gain in promoting factory work over slavery, where the wealth was being hoarded by a few, where it was perceived to be able to be hoarded by many if it changed to factory work. Having said all of this and going back to, hey, I'm white, the US has consistently promoted this idea that if you are of white standing, understanding that that is your skin tone, then you can fade in enough to control people beneath you, and hopefully in that regard you can rise through the ranks and become something you've always wanted to be. My grandma was not the right type of white, but she was of white skin, so all she needed to do was erase everything that she was from her old country to fade in, and she was perceived as good enough. And people who are of colored skin don't have that freedom. As much as you can, what is it called, code switch? You're still subjected to this trained neglect, to this trained abuse by society, where people are crabs in a bucket, pulling other people down in order to climb a ladder that is constantly pulled up away from them. Because the only reason to this country was corporate greed, was greed of the banking system. And I have ranted so much I have lost the initial point. Oh, when we have to change. So the conversation I got into recently was exactly that. Hey, I think you've suffered abuse, and I think you're reeling as an abuse victim, where, you want to be understood for what it is you went through, but those who sat sidelined to what it was you went through don't want to be told they're wrong. You may be right, but no one wants to find out they're wrong. No one wants to feel that. So they won't let you be right, no matter how much you say makes sense. And when we have to change an opinion about anyone, we charge heavily to his account the inconvenience he thereby causes us. That individual never caused you any inconvenience. You caused yourself an inconvenience by choosing to delude yourself on an idea and not understand objectivity for what it is. And then you blamed the individual that received the pain because they've accepted it so long, they grew strong, and you perceive animalistically that they can handle growth more than you can. So you put on them the abuse that you have continued to put on them, and saying that they are wrong where they are right, and you know they are right because you understand primitively that they can handle it better than you can handle to grow the fuck up. Point 126, a nation is a detour of nature to arrive at 6 or 7 great men. Yes, and then to get around them. That's interesting, especially during the Victorian period was the very early years of the nation of the US, where economy was still perceived as viable here before it would be moved to other nations. And this would be promoted into a militarized state where the 13th Amendment to the Constitution would be promoted as a means of a business model. The 13th Amendment being that those who are imprisoned are utilized as legalized slaves. And the reason I guess I say that it is interesting is that this nation did develop great people, great individuals. However, after a certain point, there was a promotion, I think along the time of Eisenhower, though it's argued whether it was Eisenhower or Nixon, the promotion to fuck with education and stupefy it pointedly. So everyone coming after that point would grow more and more incapable of understanding reality or perceiving it or using critical thinking or deductive reasoning in order to understand what is happening to everyone and everything. And therein, it is not necessarily a nation that should be spoken of, but a society that is a detour of a detour of nature to arrive at great men and then move around them. Once you have made something useful, you can't continue to make something useful lest it use you in turn, become more great than you are. You put yourself in a position where you can't control your creation. Point 127, in the eyes of all true women, science is hostile to the sense of shame. You know, they found heavy metal chemicals in tampons recently. And neuroscientists are saying that they don't keep Tampax in their homes because it causes early onset Alzheimer's. So yeah, sure, whatever. They feel as if one wished to peep under their skin with it, or worse still, under their dress and finery. Okay, this is also said at a time in which there existed traveling doctors to help masturbate women so that they could get over being crazy once a month. And literally crazy. Like, that's fucking wild, dude. When you force people into a position and then shame that on the position you force them into, and then say that what they created of themselves to survive is their own doing, not the doing of the society that created the system that they are fucked by. But you know, whatever makes you fucking comfortable. Point 128, the more abstract the truth you wish to teach, the more must you allure the senses to it. Yeah, or, you know, people can accept that they're upset by something they don't want to understand, and again, they can get over it. Your emotions are not to be acted on, they are to alert you to something. And that doesn't always indicate that your emotions are correct. As someone who is incredibly mentally ill, I often have defense mechanisms that don't necessarily make sense. They made sense when they were created, but now I am stuck trying to defend myself against someone who is only aiming to be a part of my life. So your emotions are not necessarily always substantiated. Your emotions should not be acted on. What should be acted on is logic once you have made sense of the situation. Your emotions are to help you understand the situation at hand. And in my case, if you are stuck in defense mode and you are finding yourself defending yourself in a situation, you need to understand what is happening, what pattern is constantly repeating to make you think that this situation is also repeating. Is it? There is a happenstance or a phenomenon. People are attracted to what they made themselves into. It is easiest for me to live through abuse because I only know it. And I don't know anything past that. I am undereducated. The only thing that I know well is to survive. So, if I want pride in what I have learned, it would be to put myself in a position where I'm constantly abused in the same way. And then I know that I am doing something. But when I want to grow past that, and I want to grow into a society, and I want to gain something other than abuse, I do not have the skills necessary. I did not learn them. They are something that now, in midlife, that I have to learn, that people already know. And then the comparison that society teaches you to do in order to grow better, because competition forces growth, apparently, in those who are mentally strong, puts you into a position of understanding that others have already what you wish you had. So then you're forced with, do I give up and settle for what I know best and what I know I can do? Or do I struggle past it and allow myself to not be as great as I am expected to be in the field that others have already understood themselves to be great in? And that's where you have to allow yourself to fuck up. And it's okay to be wrong. And people say that and it sounds better than it actually feels. Because it really fucking sucks to be wrong when you're expected to know better. Alright, I am past 30 minutes, so I'm going to end it there. I ended on... La 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 la. 128. Alright. Okay, take care of yourself. May your wants align with your needs. And do well in all things. Bye-bye.